name is Michael Godeck. I'm from a small town in Texas, just east of San Antonio. I started out tinkering with software in the early days of MS-DOS and personal computers, and once I got a taste of how much fun it is to play with virtual, searchable, and sortable data and organizing user interaction with it, I've never looked back. My practice area is in helping organizations to understand things in terms of systems and to understand systems in terms of services. I'm CTO of Value Factory, where we focus on a service orientation for IT operations. I've been through a lot of frameworks and methodologies over the years. Recently, I was studying the KMM while working with a client who was in the process of adopting the Scaled Agile framework. And I wanted to share some of my reflections from that experience with you today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come and hear my report. I hope that you find my observations in some way useful. We started out with the highest of hopes, and we were destined for great things. We were going to plow a green field, and we weren't going to be bound by any rigid process. I'll spare you the details because if you stop and reflect for just a moment on your own experience with these sorts of things, you probably already know where we were headed. It's true that our ad hoc Agile had devolved into a patchwork of poorly defined initiatives, unrealistic expectations, and missed deadlines. Considering our weekly burn rate, we knew it couldn't go on like that forever, but somehow it seemed like there would always be time to reform. For the longest time, management made no obvious attempt to staunch the bleeding, but all the while they were preparing their move. With the kind of results we were giving them, they had little choice but to act. The problem was seen as a lack of structure, and so structure, plenty of it, was seen as the solution. They brought in change agent contractors to train executives, managers, and leaders on how to identify value streams and to assemble agile release trains. Implementation plans were drawn up, release train schedules were prepared. Coaches and servant leaders indoctrinated the willing and the weak alike. Outposts of the new culture were established at strategic points throughout the organization. One could recognize the zealots by their excited, muffled whispers of weighted shorted job first and program increment milestones. We listened in awe as management called for a spike into the spanning palette, waxing eloquent on the critical importance of the architectural runway. When it got to the part about leveraging the solutions backlog to get everyone on the Agile train, I had to pinch myself to make sure it wasn't just a bad dream. In days of old, enterprise software teams wandered aimlessly for many moons, and even the IT chieftain knew not of a safe haven. Then Schwaber and Sutherland came to lead the tribes out of the desert to a new land of milk and scrum. In this land of dogged persistence and incremental accomplishment, the ancient muddy ritual of rugby was consecrated to a new era of software development. The mere suggestion of Kanban was understood as disloyal subversion. The pressure was on to be seen as a team player. That line from Hamilton came to mind. Talk less, smile more. Don't let them know what you're against or what you're for. The hegemony of safe culture was uncontested. I retreated into my requirements hidey hole as masters fresh out of Scrum School preached the gospel of sprint commitments and the re-education programs that awaited those who couldn't live up to their sprintly pledges. The hellfire of burn-downs became the daily catechism, and velocity was measured with all of the precision and reason of the alchemists of old in pursuit of the secret of forging gold from mud and blood. Certified safe change agents came as apostles of a great and undisputed faith, speaking of the benefits that would accrue to those who acted according to canonical practice, of a day when agile trains would run on time, and a future at astonishing scale. The way ahead would be a road paved in best practices. Meanwhile, the teams continued to crank out code. Pull requests are the fabled land where theory and practice occasionally meet for lunch. Hey, long time no see. How have you been? How many little pull requests do you have underfoot these days? Really? That many? When I bring up the topic of some gnarly dependency that's blocking a release, I might as well have invited him over to a diaper-changing party. Oh my, how time flies. I've got a 2 o'clock. But really, we should do this more often. And so theory goes off to catch a train. Say what you will about the fine art of software process engineering, but you can't get away from the fact that it all comes down to releases. Releases are made up of pull requests, and pull requests are sets of commits. In the end, it all comes down to the code. It brings to mind those immortal words of Yogi Berra. In practice, it's the code that is released to production that matters. It's called a commit for a reason. There was a wide gulf between the land where release trains were being planned and the pull request edge where code was being loaded on boxcars. More often than not, they seemed like trains headed in different directions. A path forward came in an unexpected way. A senior manager took me aside for ideas on what to do about the wreckage our project had become. There was plenty of low-hanging fruit, but thankfully I had the presence of mind to answer simply, nothing. Recalling start from where you are. My manager thought I was being sarcastic, but for once, I was in earnest. That's when the fun began. At first we had the nearly irresistible impulse to design the process to what we imagined it should be, but we recognized that trying to engineer an outcome would likely meet stiff opposition. So we soldiered on, visualizing the work and focusing our inquiry on what was impeding the flow. Once, when we began to suspect that the root of our problem was a lack of systems thinking, we looked at our problem through the lens of the Kanban maturity model. The KMM makes no presumption that intervention is somehow always a good thing. You simply practice Kanban, visualizing the work, to help ensure that you actually understand what's going on. Generally a good idea. Then you limit the work in progress in order to drive the constraints to the surface. Only then do you consider policy and practice changes, and only then as a response to the problems you actually have. The model helps in making appropriate choices. You could think of the KMM as a systematic protocol to determine when to intervene and when to leave systems alone. Imagine that, the idea that sometimes doing nothing might be your best option. The KMM doesn't insist on piling on practices, but rather provides meaningful guidance on how a company might mature incrementally. With that, my colleague asked what maturity level I thought we were at. Instead of answering, I asked a few of the standard questions. Do customers perceive service delivery as unreliable? Is there an observable lack of alignment among teams? Is work pushed into the system? Is the process stream overloaded? The answer to these and other questions indicated that we were still at the beginning of our journey. Certainly some things in our favor, but subject to the occasional regression under stress of delivery. That led to the question of what practices we should be looking to adopt. Like other maturity models, the KMM helps guide and practice adoption, but with the critical distinction that practice adoption is not a measure of success. The only real measure of success in an organization utilizing the KMM should be productivity. Now, many technology managers use the word productivity rather loosely. Often they really mean some local optimization along the lines of keeping everyone busy. Or perhaps they want to emphasize the importance of deadlines by equating productivity with performing according to their Gantt chart. Rarely do we find the word productivity used in a context that is accompanied by Andy Grove's formulation of as measured by, or anything for that matter remotely in the direction of specificity. Kanban measures productivity in terms of throughput, and once you have a stable system, throughput can be measured reliably using Little's law. You can argue about the meaning of productivity in terms of additional measurements of business value of delivered work, but as Eliyahu Goldratt pointed out in his critique of the balanced scorecard, there's virtue in simplicity. Throughput doesn't answer all of our questions about business value, but it is a sufficient metric for the context of evaluating the relationship of practices with productivity. My manager liked that part about Little's law. The whole thing made me come off as some sort of expert. Very cool math that you can count on hardly anybody knowing much about. John von Neumann had said that if you want to win a debate, you should just mention entropy because people won't want to admit that they're not sure what it means. Imagine that you're losing an argument from someone in the project management office. Not hard to do. You just let them get their point off and act as if you're agreeing with them, and then, at the last minute, like it's an afterthought, ask if they remembered to factor entropy into the estimate. That'll slow them down. At this point in the conversation, I should just fess up that I'm very much at risk of becoming a victim of my own expertise. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here together today to lay to rest any chance we had to actually understand the system and content ourselves to bits and pieces of some crafty knowledge. Experts are best at planning their own funerals. We spend our whole lives trying to become experts, only to fall on our own sword. We read books and attend the best conferences, like this one. While normal people talk about sports or how to barbecue a goat, we debate the finer points of story mapping strategies. We study hard, even reading the footnotes. We become experts. All this is necessary and good, so long as we don't fall into the trap of thinking that having expert knowledge is the same thing as knowing what to do with it. Everyone else seems to know what to do with your expertise. You're supposed to solve their problems, to recommend the best solution or the most likely outcome. You're expected to act as a sort of problem-solution matchmaker. Many consultants just assume that that's what the game is all about. The Harry Potter charm school model of consultancy where missed deadlines can be remedied with the acceleratum charm, or quality issues vanquished with the best practicum spell. We know that you're not one of those coaches selling solutions out of a Sears and Roebuck style catalog of best practices. That you're the level-headed type making a serious effort at using your intelligence to apply hard-earned knowledge to the problem at hand. Considering everything that you put into becoming an expert, it's only natural that you have the nearly irresistible instinct to respond to the challenge of a problem with a definite solution. What kind of expert are you if you can't do that? Let's take a look at how this expert solutioning thing works. Presented with a problem, you make a scan of your extensive experience, looking for patterns that seem to match the nature of the problem. We do this intuitional pattern matching in an instant, setting the context to all the critical thinking that follows. Most of what we think of as expert analysis is really just giving a story to our intuition. For a deep dive on what's going on here, see Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. Suffice it to say that chimpanzees throwing darts do surprisingly well against experts at the top of their field. Becoming more expert doesn't seem to help that much. If chimps could learn to show up to meetings on time, they could turn out to be formidable competitors to many agile coaches, especially when you consider their discounted billing rate. Although this may seem demoralizing at first, there is no need to despair. The problem isn't that expertise is valueless, it's that we apply it in a somewhat ineffective way. Let's look at this question from a different perspective. In 1932, the American geneticist Sewall Wright developed a concept of studying evolution by visualizing the distribution of fitness values. This mental model describes an immense grid called a fitness landscape, with each cell containing some random combination of species attributes. Most of them will be totally unworkable. Some will be viable, although destined for an early exit from the gene pool. Finally, there will be clusters of grids occupied by species well suited to the environment. This two-dimensional grid concept is an improvement over the usual expert strategy of picking winners, which amounts to picking one of the grids without much in the way of awareness of the whole landscape. But Wright took it a step further, transforming the fitness landscape into a three-dimensional grid, with the really awful solutions rendered as troughs and the viable solutions as peaks. Now add the dimension of time. Adding the temporal axis results in undulating peaks and valleys. As the conditions of the ideal landscape change, so do the attributes that correspond to fitness. The winning grid squares selected through expert analysis today become tomorrow's troughs. It turns out that the dartboard is more like a magically morphing target. Now think of a problem that you're asked to solve. Consider all of the combinations of all of the variables and possible system states. That's the fitness landscape where you have to survive and thrive. Our ability to show our clients around the peaks and valleys of their own fitness landscape is a good opportunity to put some distance between ourselves and the dart-throwing chimps. Any expert can land a dart on the board, but it takes someone with a good sense of direction to navigate the fitness landscape, someone who can think in terms of the system as a whole. This mental model broadens our view to understand that systems thinking is what sets us apart. Once we grasp the complexity of our problem space, we can see the deficiency of trying to pick winners through expert analysis. We need a different approach. The fitness landscape gives some sense of the journey ahead and the direction, but we still face the problem of inertia. Start from where you are is not just a slogan. What's the alternative? Start from where you aren't? I suppose that's the whole idea of Sprint Zero, to emphasize that wherever it is that you are, you're going to have to get down to the bus stop on time to catch the line for Sprint 1. Don't be late. You'll never miss the bus when you start from where you are, because you're already there. Just keep in mind that before it was a starting point, it was the end point of whatever came before, and every fresh start is going to include some small measure of resistance to change. Strategies for overcoming inertia are just as important as expert knowledge of the problem domain. The parable of Bird and Ass tells of the donkey standing exactly halfway between water and food, unable to decide which way to go. Although his inability to choose will be the death of him, you could say that the donkey is in a stable state. We tend to think of stability as our goal, but sometimes it is what stands in the way of improvement. While our donkey domain expert is off building a Monte Carlo simulation to determine the probability of the donkey dying of thirst or starvation, someone comes up from behind and whacks the donkey with a 2x4, a black swan event from the point of view of the donkey domain expert. We don't know which way the donkey is going to go. It turns out that we don't care. Often just setting things in motion is more important than knowing what the outcome will be. The metaphor of the gray squirrel sheds a little more light on our question. Although the Duke of Bedford first brought gray squirrels to England in 1870, the reign of the greys did not really begin until 1911, when the Duke of Birmingham delighted guests at a wedding party of some now long-forgotten aristocrats with a pair of American gray squirrels, Cirrus carolinus. Seeing the liberated greys scamper off into the woodlands of Coventry Park was a charming symbol of the happiness in store for the newlyweds, but distasteful and distressing for the natives, Cirrus vulgaris, the red squirrels watching from tree perches above. Something was set in motion on that day that eventually caused the Reds to abandon the English forests. Today you'd have to travel as far as Wales or Scotland to find a family of Reds. The story of how the gray squirrels came to prevail over the natives is often told in the Kanban community as a metaphor of incremental evolutionary adaptation. That even a seemingly insignificant change can bring far-reaching results when it proves to be better adapted to the problems posed by the environment. But a closer look at the social and physiological dynamics of squirrels can lead us to a better understanding of what this metaphor is about, the role of stressors in the fitness landscape. It has been more than a century since that fateful wedding party, and the internet is full of inflammatory and divisive theories about why red squirrels are exiles today from their former homeland. There are those who spew their digital invective over gray squirrel aggressiveness, while remaining silent about reports of equally belligerent reds. Some people cite scatter hoarding, or the storing of nuts in multiple places, as a key advantage of the grays over the reds. The Reds go in for the local optimization of a single nut storehouse. It does seem to have the same class of advantage as index funds, but as compelling as this theory is, it is doubtful, because the Reds don't appear to be starving. If you meet some old-timer from the Scottish Highlands, as soon as the topic of squirrels come up, which won't take long, before you know it, he'll be off on a jag about a pox on the red squirrel and the disease-bearing Americans and how he'd shoot one as soon as look at him. If you do run across one of these old-timers, you might as well settle in for a pint, because there's something about Scots and squirrels where once they get started on the topic, there's no stopping them. Some people seem to imply that the simple fact that the Carolinius are of American origin are to be a sufficient explanation for their dominance. I don't know whether to take that to mean that they're better or just bullies. As you might imagine, most of these theories are simply lacking rigor. It's interesting to note that reds and grays are known to cohabitate the same woodlands without much in the way of observable conflict. Researchers Luke Wooders and John Grunel spent 2 years radio tracking the critters, publishing the results in a 1999 issue of Ethnology Journal. They concluded that there is no more aggressive encounters between squirrels at the red-gray site than at the red-only site. In most cases, the two species seem to ignore one another. Internet trolls conveniently overlook such details as they spin their gray squirrel conspiracy theories. In the true history of gray squirrels in Britain, John Bryant notes that it has been alleged that the pox disease was transmitted by grays who are immune to the virus. In fact, out of 44 districts where red squirrels were affected, over a 20-year period, only 4 had gray squirrels present. So the gray squirrels as disease carriers turns out to be a bit of a red herring. So what is this gray squirrel thing all about anyway? Recently, a distinguished team of researchers provided the kind of hard data that fair-minded people have been waiting for in this question, in the form of a peer-reviewed paper published in the scientific Journal of Animal Ecology titled Stress and Biological Invasions, Introduced Invasive Gray Squirrels Increase Physiological Stress in Native Eurasian Red Squirrels. These intrepid scholars put some rigor to the question by gathering red squirrel scat. In their own words, they extracted glucocorticoid metabolites from fecal samples to measure whether the presence of the invasive species causes an increase in physiological stress in individuals of the native species. Glucocorticoid is a part of a feedback mechanism which serves to reduce or suppress the mammalian immune system. You've got some too. In a healthy subject, it's just another hormone that shows up at the right time to keep the system in balance. In pharmacology, it can do the trick to put an overactive immune system response back in its place. For some reason, it is overproduced in stressful situations, so if you've ever wondered why stress can be harmful to your health, glucocorticoid could be a good place to look. Too much of this stuff floating around, and you're more vulnerable to all the things that your immune system is there to protect you from. So what conclusions did the scientists reach about these formerly contented English red squirrels? The presence of the stress hormone glucocorticoid was found to be 3 times higher in red squirrels cohabitating woodlands with grays as those who still lived in forests as yet unsullied by the American Carolinius. The gray squirrels aren't stealing nuts from the natives, they're just making them nervous, an effective stressor. The stress that red squirrels feel in the presence of grays results in increased levels of glucocorticoid, which suppresses the immune system, making them more susceptible to disease such as squirrelpox. What British red squirrels need is not the extermination of their American cousins, but simply effective coaching to adopt practices appropriate to their maturity level, which will alleviate their stress. Red squirrels are clearly ML0, oblivious mode, and would benefit greatly from learning a few effective strategies, such as learning to engage in personal reflection and defining work types based on the nature of tasks. These practices are proven to reduce stress, which will bring down glucocorticoid levels and strengthen the immune system. With proper coaching, red squirrels will again be competitive in the fitness landscape. So put away your shotguns and use your coaching skills to get the reds back in the game. Now consider, had the Duke of Birmingham consulted with a wildlife professional about how to evict red squirrels from his estate, you can bet that the expert solution to the Duke's problem would have involved quite a bit more effort than lifting the latch on the cage of a couple of mail-order rodents. Of course, the Duke didn't think of his red squirrels as a problem needing solving at the time, but having the presence of mind to spin a retrospective narrative to lay claim to some irrefutable outcome, that's the stuff that consulting legends are made of. Any chimp might beat you out at the dartboard, but you can always come out ahead by telling the story of how the dart landed just where you intended. Armed with the secret weapon of retrospective narrative, we can apply the solution of the donkey's dilemma to nearly any problem. A whack with a 2x4, a pair of gray squirrels, whatever it takes to put inertia under stress, because the problem isn't really the problem. It's the stasis that resists change that is usually the tougher nut to crack. A system which isn't under stress is one that is stable. Stability doesn't much like disruption, even when that stable state is suboptimum. As Forrest Gump had said, suboptimum is as suboptimum does. The key is not to let suboptimums settle in and get comfortable, but rather to keep things in motion, keep them on his feet. No need to worry about where things will land. You can always come up with a story later to explain how you were headed where you ended up all along. If somehow you feel that you don't have time for your squirrels to work their magic, you can always put on your expert hat and gown and just tell people what to do. Most organizations will expect nothing less. The fact that they expect it doesn't mean that they'll go along with it. Colleagues from all ranks of the organization will sing Kumbaya around the campfire with you all night long, but then cross shields in defense of the status quo the following morning. But they'll be so busy guarding the ramparts that they won't even notice a couple of gray squirrels clambering over the wall. It's hard to get anything done in the face of inertia, so you can see why the metaphor of the gray squirrel is so powerful. But don't get the idea that introducing stressor is the whole game. When your problem is inertia, introduce a stressor to get things in motion, stir things up, trigger a response. When there's a positive response seeking stability, that's when it's time to consolidate your gains. The KMM gives us a mental model for these two modes, transitional versus consolidation phases. Transitional to get things in motion, and then consolidation around improvements. This idea of phases is not the same as whatever cadence you've arrived at. It is more a reflection of the dynamics of inertia and stability. As long as inertia is blocking improvement, you should consider that you're in a transitional phase. People that are really good at resisting change will also be good at dragging out the transitional phase. Some things just take time. The gray squirrels didn't conquer the rainy island in a fortnight. The KMM gives us another mental model to help sort out which practices work best in transitional phases and which are better suited for consolidation phases. These are normative versus structural changes. A normative change is a revision of policy or procedure which doesn't disrupt the social structure, thus is less likely to meet resistance and more likely to build trust in the idea that change can lead to improvement. In contrast, structural changes imply the need for some adaptation of roles, responsibilities, or status of team members, hence, less likely to succeed without the buy-in from those who are affected. Buy-in is earned by building trust. Building trust provides the foundation to allow team maturity to grow through self-reinforcing dynamics of these phases. An interesting thing we found is that many of the same dynamics apply to any team, including Scrum teams. The concepts of pairing transitional versus consolidation phases with normative versus structural practices is a powerful model for moving things in the right direction. Of course, the specific practices of the KMM will be out of reach for Scrum teams who trade off a focus on managing actual constraints with the sort of lump sum constraint of the sprint time box. It's a lower fidelity operation. But as Donald Rumsfeld said, you go to war with the army you have. Whatever the specific practices you're considering, it still makes sense to ask if you should be focusing on moving the inertia needle or if it's time to try to consolidate gains. For example, when determining when to attempt to move from transitional phase to the consolidation phase in Kanban, you can design pull policies and other board attributes to visualize the signals. The turning point will be right there on the card wall, getting rid of a lot of the guesswork. When working with Scrum boards without explicit WIP limits and queue management, you'll have to work harder to observe other telltale signs. Thanks to the intrepid researchers from the animal ecology community, we now have some hard evidence to work with to understand how to read the dynamics of stressors. The secret of knowing when to pivot from a transitional to consolidation phase depends on getting feedback that indicate that your stressors are working. This has been the secret sauce of top coaches, but now that we know about glucocorticoid, every coach can pivot like a pro. Saving thousands of hours of difficult and expensive trial and error, we now use ScrumScat, the mobile phone app which provides real-time readings of glucocorticoid metabolite from Scrum Master Scat. Let the gray squirrels loose, set the trigger levels in the app. When Scrum Master glucocorticoid spikes, you'll know that it's time to pivot to the consolidation phase, taking the guesswork out of one of the most treacherous decisions faced by Agile coaches. You can see by now that the problem of getting the right feedback is at the center of everything, so it should come as no surprise when we encounter the feedback problem in scaling frameworks. We're going to have to get a lot of different feedback mechanisms right before the Agile trains will be running on time. When you bring up the topic of feedback in the Agile community, people seem to think along the lines of the kind of thing that happens in a retrospective session. The kind of information gathered in this way is valuable and important, and it's certainly an improvement over the kind of insensitivity that was the norm in pre-Agile IT departments. But there are other kinds of feedback as well. The profit and loss statement, for example. The P&L seems to be considered a bit of a relic in the age of Agile, but it has stood the test of time as a valuable feedback mechanism, especially when avoiding bankruptcy is one of your KPIs. Something about enterprise digital transformation initiatives has always struck me as odd, with everyone looking much like they did before, but acting in ways inconsistent with their former decorum. I gained some insight into this dynamic through the story of Phineas Gage, retold by Tim Harford in his book Adapt. About 20 years before the American Civil War, Phineas was blasting rock for the Rutland and Burlington Railroad just south of Cavendish, Vermont. Phineas was tamping down blasting powder in a rock bore when the metal tamping rod generated a spark which ignited the explosive powder. At the moment when the powder ignited, Phineas was just turning to talk to his crew behind him, bringing his head inadvertently in line of the trajectory upon which the rod was about to embark. The steel tamping rod was a little over an inch in diameter and just over 3 feet long. The steel rod entered Phineas's open mouth, passed behind his left eye, clear through the left frontal lobe of his brain, exiting with force at the top of his skull, landing some 80 feet away. The unfortunate Mr. Gage had the remarkable fortune to not only survive, but remained conscious through the ordeal and was able to explain the circumstances of the accident to the attending physician a half hour later, while the good doctor stared at disbelief at the gaping hole of the man's skull. Although the steel rod carried off a not entirely insignificant portion of Phineas's brain, he recovered and went back to work, although not for the railroad. He traveled to Chile and took a job as a stagecoach driver on the Valparaiso-Santiago line, evidence that he continued in life as more than an invalid. Other than being blind in the left eye, he looked like the same man as before. But there was some distinctive change in behavior. Before he had been known as a reasonable man, but Phineas missing a decent-sized chunk of his brain was often belligerent and indifferent to social norms he had previously respected. In short, while he retained nearly all of the abilities of his former self, he seemed to have lost much of his ability to process feedback. When enterprises embark upon a digital transformation odyssey, it sometimes seems as if they suffer a steel rod blasted through the corporate cranium, taking out the part of the brain that processes feedback about profit and loss, while leaving everything else intact. Whereas before we knew vigilant guardians of the balance sheet, we find purveyors of retrospective narrative, turtles all the way down. If an Agile transformation initiative is going to improve our ability to deliver value to the business, then we should be able to tell the story of that value in the P&L. It's true that under the best of circumstances, the P&L traditionally aggregates cost accounting metrics while being blind to the value delivered by productivity and quality initiatives. These shortcomings of traditional cost accounting have been taken by Agile advocates as a license to tell a good story in place of doing the hard work of verifiable quantitative analysis. I understand that it's not an easy problem, but papering over the misalignment between Agile initiatives and the P&L is a lot like Phineas without the feedback part of his brain. You can count on him showing up to work, but you might wonder what he's capable of next. It's only reasonable that the budget be the voice of the customer. I think that some of the most important work before us today is to strip away the apparent complexity around what we mean by productivity, including how to measure it, and to put those metrics in alignment from the pull request edge all the way through to the P&L. Time is our most valuable asset, and I thank you so much for devoting a bit of yours to my humble account. I hope that you found something of it to be of inspiration in your own journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michael, for an educational and entertaining talk. Really appreciate it. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Excellent. Got a couple of questions here. Going to start out with a couple of good fun ones. Love your comment about the Agile coaches carrying their Sears and Roebuck catalog. So do you think Agile coaches are going the way of Sears and Roebuck?
I think Agile is going the way of Sears and Roebuck. Yes, for sure. We've been waiting for we've been talking about this for a long time. You go to all of the conferences that I've been to over recent years. Pretty much the coaches are all just scratching their head, saying, like, really, what's going on in these companies? We can't, it's like there's a disconnect between especially transformation initiatives, and the reality of the value of the initiatives. But there was always a sense of futility that somehow Agile was bigger than life itself. But now we're in this punctuation point. Life has become far more serious, and the a lot of our future over the next years will be focused on survival, and for organizations on staying in business. And so it's really time to clear away a lot of the mythology. Deming referred to this like we lived in an era of management mythology, and that was obviously even before Agile. And clear away the mythology and bring things back to a real sense of of what is productivity, what creates value in the organization. And so those aspects of Agile coaching that have to do with packages of best practices, or these kind of like plug and play frameworks, they are not going to be that their days are winding down. And obviously, they'll be around for a long time. People are still programming in COBOL, and we'll still have this stuff around for a long time. But the future is I think, is now transitioning to an opportunity to actually talk about productivity.
Oh, excellent. Well, this one I can't resist. Does Scrum's cat come from Scrum Butt?
No, it doesn't. No, Scrum's cat.
Okay. Scrum cat comes from everywhere.
Yeah.
All right, good.
All right, yes.
All right. Well, so this one you've got a fan. This one comes from David Anderson. This talk is a work of art, hilarious, beautiful, extensively researched, maybe a bit advanced for those other than KCP or AKTs. But what do you think are the 3 takeaways for the layman Kanban novice attending today?
Well, the importance of really understanding structural versus normative change is, from a practical perspective, it's the only way that I've found to survive in very large enterprises. And I've been in large enterprises for over 20 years. And I've always thought that there was something wrong with me. But now I'm beginning to see more clearly that it's like that the internal logic of organizations themselves have degrees of self-destructiveness that's involved. And you can't change everything. But when you start with normative changes, in other words, you don't actually, if you try to figure out the things that you can see that need to be done, and you sort them out into things that you have to get other people's cooperation with, you have to get them to change in some way, you can leave those aside for the time being and sort out there's always something that you can do, that you can put in place, that you actually don't have to get buy-in from the rest of the organization. Those are the normative changes, and those are accessible, right? People won't stand in your way when you put those in place. And so different kinds of metrics that an example of that would be the logic of the kind of the self-destructive nature of these large organizations, and many organizations have to do with the the pressures to local optimization, that each department, each individual has got pressures on really to optimize things in terms of their own area of responsibility or their own budget line, et cetera. And those local optimizations end up taking away from business value because they're focused on the local optimization. And when we think in terms of the system, we think of the business in terms of the system, and we think in terms of the globally optimizing a value stream. If you look at some product that you're working on, if you can look at it end to end and look at the what would be required for global optimization of the process that you're working on, and try to figure out how to lay down some metrics that are actually addressing the global optimization, then usually people won't stand in your way about trying to put together some metrics, right? Is this adding that? But once you can start talking about things in terms of the global optima instead of the local optima, then it gives you some ground to be able to talk about other types of changes that can take place.
All right, that's great. Yeah, and as you're talking about that from a global optimization perspective, you also towards the end said how important it is to tie it back to the P&L. So how do we make sure that we're aligning what we're doing to the P&L, to corporate accounting? How do we get that complete system where we're really trying to optimize the right thing and not even though we might think we're optimizing globally, but actually we're optimizing on the wrong thing. So it's a
right. It's a hard question. There's two sides of the question. There's the pragmatic side that we find ourselves in an organization where we don't even have access to the people that could have the authority to change the accounting system from the top down. In which case, it's like a limited practical strategy for improving things, and so that's one half of it. And then the other part is the systemic part we can get to. But from just looking at it, the pragmatic thing where you can't change the accounting practices, we recognize that that P&L accounting has got fundamental flaws in it in terms of the way that it's taught in business schools of having profit being the revenue minus the cost as the equation, and there's so much more to it than that. But that's all that shows up by the time it shows up on the balance sheet in the P&L. Deming spoke about this a lot throughout his work, and the things that we without fixing that part, some of the things that we can do is we can organize our work clearly into services, and we can begin to draw a distinction between services that are in some type of process control, statistical control from out of statistical control. We need to bring the processes into statistical control, which again, if you go through Deming and Schuhart, there's the track of how to go about doing that. And then with process, what we need to do is to provide as much as possible a clear mapping to where the value is actually occurring, all the way down to the pull request edge where code is being committed, right? One of the problems that we have is that by the time, as things get rolled up through the organization, we lose fidelity. And so by the time you even get up into the middle management reporting, nobody really has much of a sense of what's going on in terms of the code. So the code commit stuff lives in one world, these accounting goals sit in another world, and then they drift apart, and the conversations become practically meaningless at that level. And so we can help by providing some discipline and accounting science around the work that we're actually doing, and to bring that in alignment. It won't really solve the problem in a global sense. In the global sense, I've got a couple of books on my reading list. I'm still working into this. There's Tom Johnson and Robert Kaplan wrote a series of books called Relevance Lost, Relevance Regained. I really like that because I guess it's a spin on John Milton. And then Profit Beyond Measure. And those books and those authors are, I believe, very much aligned with Deming's work. There's Bionomics Economy as an Ecosystem by Michael Rothschild, and Leadership in the New Science by Margaret Wheatley.
those are a set of 5 books on my reading list that are all about kind of this other level of the question of saying, okay, if we can get ourselves into organizations that actually want to take this seriously in terms of reorganizing accounting at the top level so that they can actually align the accounting that's reported for management decisions at the top level, even in global organizations, all the way down to the pull request edge to make mapping of this stuff so that not so that you have to know all the details, but that you can find all the details and you can actually get to where productivity is happening and how productivity is contributing to profitability, and how it's not all just a question of adding up numbers, but it's where it comes into the social processes that are creating these things. Then this is the area that I hope to work on. So I invite all of you, any of you who want to collaborate on this, to reach out and let's work on this together.
All right, great, thank you. So here's a good question for you. Since you're in a safe environment, are you saying that safe doesn't work? Is that what you mean?
Safe is great. It's just like anything. I mean, if you actually did safe, there's nothing wrong with, the thinking through. If you have a number of different teams, a lot of different projects in motion, the concept of establishing programming increments and trying to do some planning to make sure that different projects that interact with each other land at the same time. That's your agile train stuff. Perfect, no problem. All that stuff is great. The problem I have is where the guys working on the agile train are actually, they consider that what's going on the pull request edge is like somebody else's responsibility. And it's true that they can't get involved in all of the technical details that are required in order to deliver our systems. But there needs to be an alignment between the work the work that actually lands as service deliverables and the agile release trains. If those are disconnected, then no, it doesn't work. Which is that, truth be told, that's where most safe organizations, I think, are. Of course, it's a big world. I don't know what everybody's doing, but a lot of times what we find with these kinds of frameworks is that really they turn out to be a language and a vocabulary that management it's like an agile language that they can overlay on business as usual business processes. And so really nothing changes. The reality is that nothing changes as a result of the framework. They just have now a language in which they can describe, how each individual can defend their own local optima. So that part is not great, but it could work in theory. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, that's great. I think we always, my wife was in organizational change, and she always used to say that organizational change was about creating a new vocabulary and doing the same thing. So yeah, it's certainly, we see that a lot.
Pretty much, yeah.
One last question then. What were some of the different types of leadership challenges you faced, and how did you mitigate these?
That's a good question. I think that I still place social psychology as an area that I need to do a lot of work on still. So I would tend, rather than kind of jump into a space where I'm not necessarily the best qualified, I think that just to refer to that is that most of what it is that we see as business school management conception of management is dysfunctional. Most of my interactions over my career have been in hierarchical organizations in which the effective decisions appear to be arbitrary. So I've always kind of struggled for trying to see how to establish a relationship in the context of leadership. Right? I guess I don't really have a great answer for that going in, other than to say that there's just a lot of work that we need to do in the area of social psychology to rethink what leadership actually means. And to that end, I'm mostly working. There's a really great book I'm working through right now called The Symphony of Profound Knowledge by Edwin Martin Baker, who was one of the people that worked with Deming. He was at Ford. And this is a book that just came out in the last couple of years, and it's just a beautifully written book. It's just magnificent. And he definitely goes into this area in that. So I'll defer to him, follow him.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for such a wonderful talk. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, please reach out. michaelgodeck.com is my site. You can find information how to contact me there, and please don't hesitate to reach out for a conversation.